The return of David Tennant to play the 14th Doctor has been a subject of much debate within the Doctor Who fandom of late, and I've made it pretty clear that I'm quite on board with the idea. It makes sense for an anniversary. I think it'll do good things for the show. I'm excited to see how it ties into the 60th anniversary plotline, and overall I just think it's an interesting idea. But of course, there's a myriad of opinions on this development. So in today's video, I asked you guys what some of your opinions were on it. So we're going to be discussing the pros and cons to David Tennant as the 14th Doctor. But before we get into it, if you could do me a teeny tiny little favour and click that subscribe button, it would be very much appreciated. We are trying to get to 17,000 subscribers by the end of this month, and we're going to try and get to 20,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so any support would be very much appreciated on that front. Also, go follow me on Twitter if you want to take part in more polls and stuff, because that's where a lot of the answers for this video come from. But with that said, let's get into the video. So as I alluded to at the start of the video, I put a poll out on both my Twitter and on my community tab saying, what are your opinions on David Tennant being the 14th Doctor now that the idea has had time to settle? Feel free to leave your reasons in the comments below. And the responses are pretty interesting. So on both of them, we've got sort of 70% of people, or just under or over 70% of people saying they're cool with the idea, about 10% saying that they are not a fan of the idea, and about 20% saying they need more time to judge the idea for themselves. So that's basically, learning more plot details about it and stuff like that, which is a completely understandable position to be in. But it seems as though, through my limited audience testing, the majority of my audience are on board with the idea, but I want to go over some of your reasonings as to why you are and why you aren't. Draw the TARDIS says, fine by me. It's something that hasn't been done before, so that's exciting. The fact that he's returning with Catherine Tate is what makes it thrilling, though. The Doctor and Donna reunited, but at what cost? I can't wait. So yeah, that's something I want to kind of highlight with this video. I know a lot of people sort of see it as, oh, it's just an old Doctor coming back, but the idea of a Doctor regenerating into a past face is unprecedented territory for the show. We've never had a sort of sequence of Doctors be interrupted in this fashion before, because we knew going in that Ncuti was going to be our mainline Doctor going forward, but to have this kind of Doctor in between as the Doctor we follow is something kind of novel. I mean, we've had things like the War Doctor, where they fill gaps in between that we weren't previously aware of, but they were never the leads for multiple episodes. This is the current Doctor that we'll be following for 3 episodes. So that's really interesting. On the Donna Noble front, I think the idea of that is really interesting too, because obviously we know with her, there's a lot of stuff surrounding her exit and the memory stuff. And how is that going to work? Is it going to be something to do with the Toymaker? Catherine Tate's return is one that's sort of kind of lumped in with Tennant's return, but I do think that's interesting in itself, because she's not an immediately easy character to bring back because of the reason she left. Like Martha Jones, for example. You could very easily bring her back, and it would make sense, because Martha Jones was dropped off on Earth, and you could pick her back up, and, you could have some maybe conflict with the Doctor, about like how perhaps the Doctor didn't take her problems seriously, but there's nothing really stopping her coming back. With Donna, because of the way she left, because of her memory, her coming back is surrounded in mystery as well, so that is really interesting. Max Rock Atansky 85, I hope I'm saying that right. I'm fine with the Doctor regenerating back into Tennant. I'm not sure if I'm fine with him officially being numbered by 14 and taking up 2 numbers yet. So yeah, this is another thing I've seen discussed a lot. The whole numbering aspect is something that I've seen brought up a lot in this. The idea that I'm not sure how I feel about him officially being referred to as 14. Personally, I've said before, the numbering doesn't really bother me. Like, I kind of stopped caring about the numbering as soon as the War Doctor was introduced. It's always kind of been an arbitrary thing for fans, and also, I guess, marketing purposes as well. So for me, the numbering stuff doesn't really affect me that much. You've also got to think as well, with the advent of things like the Timeless Child, which obviously I know that, a lot of people don't like, and I'm kind of in that group, it's kind of been implied that, like, the Doctor can regenerate pretty much endlessly now. So I don't think we need to be quite as selective as, to who can play each incarnation. You can do a bit more experimental stuff like this as a result of basically now anyone can play the Doctor at any time, so maybe that is a pro in a way. V says, I just hope that, even though it's the same actor, it's a whole different incarnation. But I trust RCD and his mastermind. There's got to be a reason, an innovative through line to Ncuti. I just hope it's the last we see of Tennant for a while. Let others come back. So yeah, there's a couple of things to go over with this. Obviously, the idea of him playing a different incarnation. I definitely think he's playing it slightly differently. Obviously, I know a couple of people have noted that the voice does sound marginally different, and I am one of those people who can hear a minor difference. Maybe it is just his age, but I don't know, maybe the inflections are slightly different, because maybe he's deliberately playing a more matured version of his original character. You gotta think as well that this version of Tennant's Doctor is going to have the knowledge and experience of 11, 12, and 13. So that's naturally going to impact the way they view certain scenarios, perhaps. Also, beyond that, I think what's interesting about making Tennant the 14th Doctor is that both the writer, Russell T Davies, and David Tennant aren't married to having to play and write the character exactly the same. Because say, for example, you pick up the 10th Doctor from, I don't know, Sontaran Stratagem up to The Doctor's Daughter or something like that, around Series 4, you are basically married to making sure that he acts exactly the same as he did then, and David Tennant has to portray him in the exact same way, which obviously is not only a bit creatively limiting, but for perhaps the actor and writer as well, it might be easier to craft a slightly new character around that, given that obviously Tennant is older, and Russell T Davies' writing style has naturally changed. So it kind of making him a new incarnation rather than just plucking the 10th Doctor out from a separate point in time arguably creates more creative opportunities than just having the 10th Doctor pop up like he did in, say, Day of the Doctor, for example. Not to say that I didn't enjoy Day of the Doctor and his appearance within that, but I think this is a new idea, having a actor reprise their role as the Doctor, but as a different incarnation. I think that's a unique idea. On the topic of other Doctors, I do get that as well, like people wanting to see other Doctors. I'm kind of fine with it being Tennant for a couple of reasons, at least this time round. I'm fine with it being Tennant, not only because in the previous episode, the Centenary Power of the Doctor, we've just seen like all the classics pop back up, and in terms of the modern guys, obviously 9 is basically off the table, 12 seems to be in a similar place. I've spoken a few times about how Peter Capaldi doesn't seem to want to come back, which is fair enough. The only other one would be obviously Matt Smith, who I do want to see again, but I understand the risk of you basically just making Day of the Doctor again, and obviously 13 has literally just left, so the chances of her coming back is slim. But I do agree, I would like to see more Doctors after this point. I do think, because I think David Tennant is at an age where he can still pull off being the Doctor, and you're not really, you don't really bat an eye too much. Obviously, it's sort of masked by the fact that you can play a new incarnation, so you don't have to look exactly like you did in the 2000s. But I do think that maybe by the 70th, he might be like, I've had my time now. But yeah, I do agree. I think after this anniversary, I'd like to see more Doctors. That is, of course, assuming there are no other Doctors in this anniversary, which there very well could be, we're not sure. Thomas and Lady Friend says, I'm not a fan. I like David as the Doctor, but Ncuti should have been 14. So yeah, this is something I've seen, the idea of Ncuti should have become first instead of David. My only assumption as to why that didn't happen is because Ncuti has literally been busy, and while it's looking like we're going to get some stuff with him in the 60th, he was also off filming Barbie and Sex Ed and stuff like that. And as I said before, you could have him return as the 10th Doctor for a few specials, but that's not quite as exciting or narratively interesting in my opinion as this, which is a new incarnation which could have been brought about for a myriad of reasons. I think as well, in terms of for Ncuti's benefit, the idea of relaunching the show to mass popularity with Tennant to then hand on to Ncuti arguably leaves Ncuti in a hell of a lot more of a healthy starting point than it would if he just picked up from Whittaker. Because, obviously, while we will never know truly the successful failure of each era, because that's something really only the BBC themselves will know, I think most people would agree that this era hasn't been quite as popular as previous ones, so the idea of getting Doctor Who back to its apex of popularity and then handing it on to the new guy is arguably doing him a favour, because having to build a new brand and a new era on the foundations that are rocky is a hard task. And while I don't doubt Ncuti could do it, I think that these are the perfect circumstances to rebuild Doctor Who into a bit of like an institution again. Jack says, if it was a new writer, I may be sceptical, but simply because it's RTD and he has a great track record, IMO, I trust him. I had no idea who Ncuti was, but for me, it didn't really matter who he cast, because I simply trust him in making the right decisions. Yeah, I agree with that. If it was another writer making David Tennant the new Doctor, I would be a bit like, not sure how I feel about that, that feels a bit desperate. But the thing is about Russell is, I trust him to have a cool narrative reason for it. Also beyond that, he has treated legacy characters really, really well. One only has to look at Sarah Jane and the way she is used in the revival to see that he not only really faithfully continues the stories of legacy characters, but also tells new compelling stories with them. Sarah Jane is loved by multiple generations of fans, not only the fans who grew up with her in the 70s, but also people who were reintroduced to her through the modern series and things like Sarah Jane Adventures, where her character grew and became a mother and someone who was protective of the people around her and was just kind of a badass in a lot of Sarah Jane Adventures. So I really trust him to handle these characters with care and handle these ideas with care. So I think that's a great point, is that I think Russell writing it kind of gives me faith. Because the thing about Power of the Doctor, for example, is don't get me wrong, I enjoyed Ace and Tegan being in it, but there is an element of that of they're just sort of saying their old catchphrases and acting how you would always expect them to. You know, Ace has the jacket, the baseball bat, etc., which, don't get me wrong, is cool to see, but it almost feels a bit sort of, I guess, like Flanderization almost. It feels like a tiny bit hollow, if you get what I'm trying to say. Whereas I feel like when Russell T Davies would continue a legacy character, it would feel like a natural evolution. Like, Ace almost feels like she never left the show, which in a way is cool, but in another way you're kind of like, I want to know what's happened in her life since, which you don't really get with the Power of the Doctor. Sans a couple of moments with her in Seven, where she's talking about, you know, how Seven and her fell out. But yeah, I think the fact that it's Russell is something that really does reassure me about this. Going over into the YouTube comments, revisiting old faces, just the favourites, was hinted by the curator. No one said they'd be voluntary though. I think RTD will give a good story reason for it, whatever our real world feeling pressures made something like this inevitable. So I think that's a really good point. The curator does mean that there is precedent for this. There is a precedent for a classic Doctor coming back to portray a new incarnation. And I do think, you know, real world circumstances do need to be taken into account when factoring in things like this. Because in terms of the BBC's in a struggling spot. You know, they want to try and defund it by 2027, I think. The government want to try and defund it by 2027. So they need their big exports firing on all cylinders. And in terms of bringing back Doctor Who to its popularity, bringing back Tennant for an anniversary as a Doctor makes all the sense in the world, and relaunching it with a new Doctor after that, again, is a great vehicle for the reasons I outlined before. And the whole Disney Plus deal is further proof of that. And I get why people would see it as a commercially cynical decision. But I think, as has been said by Ian here, as long as there's a good story reason for it, I think it could work pretty well. I think there's also just the fact beyond that I feel as though, had it not been for this, there's a possibility that we just wouldn't have had any 60th anniversary content, because, as I said, other Doctors aren't as available. Ncuti Gatwa was busy filming other things, so I imagine that his role in the 60th will be pretty minor. So, on that level, I am kind of just glad that we have a 60th anniversary in general. And then finally, The Outcast says, I'm not a fan of Tennant being referred to as the 14th Doctor and Ncuti being called 15. I'm pretty sure that ultimately it's a bait, and it's something that'll piss me off for at least another year until this twist happens. Also significantly miffed why we didn't get a Whittaker to Gatwa regeneration. As far as a post-End of Time 10 re-encountering Donna and moving past this whole I don't want to go thing, that's an idea I'm totally fine with. It's really just the stuff that's surrounding the whole regeneration I'm not a fan of. I think for the most part the specials will be a good watch. I think that's a fair position to be in. I've seen some people say that the regeneration should have been from Whittaker to Gatwa, and I think while I understand that perspective, I understand why they didn't do it if Tennant is going to be the Doctor we're following predominantly for the next year. Because why would you have another Doctor regenerate only to not see them for however many, specials Ncuti's not going to be in, or however it's going to work. The other thing I think is interesting, and this is an idea that's occurred to me, is currently Ncuti Gatwa is being referred to as the 15th Doctor, which personally I think is a bait. I agree with The Outcast. I think currently, yes, it's 14 and 15, but I do think there's going to be more to that than we know currently. Officially, right now, yeah, Tennant is 14, but I think there's going to be some narrative justification for that, whether it's something to do with the Toymaker messing about with the regeneration or the Doctor's body or something like that. Right now, they're calling him the 14th Doctor, basically to just make it easier for casuals to understand, but I do think there'll be more of a reason for it when the actual episodes come out. At least I think. But as I said before, even if he gets referred to as 15 beyond this point, it's not really something that bothers me because the numbering doesn't really bother me, so yeah. And then Delta Productions says, I wish there was a totally hyped button. Yeah, because that's the thing. The majority of people are really excited for this. And I've had a lot of others saying that, they're really excited. So I think overall people are just excited to see him back. But let me know how you feel about David Tennant playing the 14th Doctor. Do you think it's a good idea like I do? Do you think that maybe this is a problem? Or do you just need more time to think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop them down in the comments below. Let's talk about them. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to give it a like. Subscribe if you're new, and I will see you later.